I made a video a few months ago on RC racing on a budget. Since then I've learned a lot about how to race on a budget, mostly by necessity. Also, the audio quality of that video was quite off to be honest, and I think I could have done a better job explaining the actual costs of RC racing and where they come from. In this video I want to get a decent idea of the running cost of running an RC racing gig, or multiple rigs. Before we begin however, I'd like to remind you to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already and like the video if you enjoy it. Without further delay, let's begin. It's important to note, like in the last video, I'm going to be going over the retail price of everything that I list in this section, as used prices can vary wildly. I'll get into that later. First, let's go over the price of the base kit itself. No wheels, no tires, no paint, no electronics, just the price of the kit that you buy straight from the factory. Now depending on which brand you go for and which store you buy it from, the cost here may vary. For example, this Team Associated B6.3 is for sale for $340 on A main, and this Losi 22 5.0 roller is for sale for $320. However, if you're willing to spend a little extra cash, you can snag a kit from Schumacher, X-Ray, or Yokomo, as they're arguably higher quality for the sole reason their parts are not made in China. They're made in the UK, Slovakia, and Japan respectively. It also depends on what type of racing you'll be doing. Off-road, for whatever reason, is a lot less expensive than on-road. Your average on-road kit is above the price of an average 4-wheel drive 10-scale buggy kit, and much more than your average 2-wheel drive kit. In my case, I spent about $400 on a Yokomo YZ2 Cal 3. Next up we have the electronics for 10-scale cars. Now if you're just starting out and say you're only running stock or your track only runs stock class for whatever reason, I wouldn't buy an extremely expensive ESC. For budget ESCs, you have two main choices from Reedy and Hobbywing, the Z-Run G3 XR10 Just Stock and the Reedy Black Box 600Z G2, both of which are zero timing ESCs that are made for budget stock racing for less than $70. Now if your track runs mod and you plan on running mod, then you're going to need to shell out some extra cash for an ESC that can actually handle a mod motor. The ESC that I have in my YZ2 is a Hobbywing Z-Run 160 amp that can handle anything down to 3.5 turns, which was about $200. Speaking of motors, again we have a choice of budget motors and really expensive motors. If you're looking for a decent budget option, you can grab something like a Road Dogg motor or an Eco Power motor, both for less than $100. If you're willing to shell out some more cash, you can get something from one of the more mainstream brands like Hobbywing, Reedy, Trinity, or Tekin, all of which make very good motors. The Reedy S Plus motor that I have in my YZ2 costs $95 retail. Another thing to take into account would be the steering servo. Now I must say that this part of the car I absolutely would not cheap out on, lest your car handle like a greasy weasel. Now when I say this, I don't mean spending $150 on a high torque servo for your 2-wheel drive buggy, as that's simply unnecessary. For 10th scale, having a high speed servo is much more important. The Savox 1258TG is a perfect servo for those who want something that performs, is durable, and doesn't completely break the bank. It's right around $75 retail. Lastly, we have the receiver and transmitter. I already did a video on these before, so I won't get into much detail this time around. What I will say is that chances are if you buy a really expensive top-of-the-line transmitter, you're probably not going to make use of all of its features. The MT4S that I have cost when it was new about $400, but if you're on a budget, I'd grab something for Futaba or even FlySky, as their stuff is perfectly serviceable and will help get you started much quicker. Now depending on which type of racing you do, and what type of surface you might be running on, the cost of tires may differ greatly. If you run on a surface that requires slicks, congrats! You don't have to spend too much money on tires all the time, as the life of a slick tire, for most people, will be about the same as the lifespan of the foam on the inside. Once that goes bad, it's generally time to get a new set of tires. If you run on an outdoor surface, you might have to grab a few sets of tires, most of the time 3. One set for when it's loamy and a bit damp, one set for when it's dry and dusty, and one for when it's dry and abrasive. If you're running on carpet or turf, you won't need to worry too much about that, but tires will wear down quickly, so keep that in mind. A new set of buggy tires like these aka slicks cost right around $50 with wheels. Now for all the other small things I bought to help me in racing. First we have the setup board, which is about $30. This ProTech camber gauge was about $15 on sale, but $30 retail, so we'll count it as retail. An MIP driver set for 2.5mm, 2mm, and 1.5mm for $25. This ultra power charger was $60. The batteries are Reedy low profile batteries and for $45 each. This Milapse transponder was way too expensive at $90. And lastly, we have this Ryobi soldering gun, which was $70. Alright, so what I did is I added up everything that I've put into RC Racing specifically for this Yokomo YZ2, and we're going to see how much it actually is. Yeah, $1,560. Now, right around this point, some of you may have clicked off this video thinking there's no way in hell I'm spending that money on a toy car. But for those of you who stayed, let me show you some ways in which you don't have to. Now, the number one thing you can do to save money is to buy your stuff used. Keep in mind, there are certain things you don't want to buy used, like batteries for example. LiPo batteries, if not taken care of, can be very volatile, so always be sure to buy them new or from someone you know does take care of them. However, for things like motors, ESCs, servos, and especially transponders, you can absolutely get away with buying them used. First off, we have the car itself. There are a few benefits to buying a car used compared to new. For example, if you're lucky, some people are willing to sell you their used rig for just "I want to get rid of them" prices. Sometimes even including the electronics as well. At best, it'll be exactly what you're looking for, and at worst, you can just sell the electronics on eBay to recoup some funds to buy the electronics you wanted in the first place. Also, if you're new and don't really know how to build a kit, having one already built for you can help you get on the track that much quicker. However, there are some issues with buying a used car. Just like buying a full-size used car, buying a used RC car can come with a few issues if the car itself wasn't taken care of. Bearings may be seized and need to be replaced, ball studs and screws may be rusted, and so on and so forth. There could be a lot of things that need to be addressed. That's why buying a roller or slider or anything used in person is preferred to buying it blind. Ask them questions like whether or not the car was ever rebuilt, and if so, how many times? When was the last time it was driven? Has it been sitting for a while? The same kind of things you'd ask for a full-size car, just with lower stakes. Keep in mind, however, RC cars depreciate like bricks, so be sure to look everywhere for a good deal. As for motors, you can usually get away with a used motor 90% of the time, and for really good prices. Remember that Reedy S Plus motors I mentioned before in my video? Yeah, I bought that secondhand for $35. This is the same story with the ESC, which I bought with the motor for $60, because it was already used, and that's not really a unicorn of a deal to be perfectly honest. The servo I did buy new, but it's not hard to find really good ones out there for less than $50, like this 1258 TG I have in my short course truck that I bought for $40. Lastly, we have the transponder and your receiver. Transponders seem to be the one thing that doesn't really depreciate like a stone falling off a skyscraper the moment you remove it from the package, so you're going to want to look for prices between the $70 and $80 range. As for receivers, it mostly depends on what brand you go for. For example, Futaba receivers tend to be right around the $50 to $60 range, whereas Sanwa receivers tend to be in the $90 to $100 range. Keep this in mind when going for a specific brand of transmitter. Speaking of which, I bought that MT4S transmitter for $150. Don't be afraid to go for an older model, as they'll usually have the same functionality as newer models, just with different ergonomics. Lastly, for tires, may I recommend heading to a large race event where there are a lot of big teams there. Lots of times, team drivers will toss you once used tires, and if you ask, they'll probably lend you some before they toss them in the bin. Speaking of sponsorships and team drivers, lots of people seem to get the idea of sponsorships a bit wrong in the RC world, so let me clear it up for you. Very few drivers out there actually get free stuff from their sponsors, and even fewer actually get paid by them. For the vast majority of sponsored drivers, they get discounts on parts and products in exchange for endorsing them. The only catch is that they can only really use their products. For example, if you're sponsored by Proline, you can't really use J-Concepts tires lest you lose your sponsorship. Getting certain sponsorships can be more or less a bit difficult depending on which company you go for. I used to have a Hobbywing sponsorship, but I probably only got it because I have a YouTube channel. Tire sponsorships are a little bit more difficult to get, but they do help you save a lot of money as tires are very, very expensive and tend to be the thing we go through the most. But by far the most difficult type of sponsorship you can try and get is a chassis sponsorship. They only really take active and really good drivers, so that pretty much rules me out. If you're a good enough driver and you think you have what it takes, go ahead and fill out an application. The worst they can say is no. I'm not going to add up everything again on this calculator because I already did it, but it adds up to $885 of what I actually spent on just my two-wheel drive buggy. Now that sounds like a lot still, but keep this in mind. I spent about $600 on this gaming PC that I use to edit, play video games, and basically work. And that's not including the monitor, that's not including the keyboard, the mouse, the microphone, the webcam that I'm talking to you from. All of that stuff adds up, and suddenly lots of hobbies don't seem so cheap anymore. And 10th scale racing can be a budget-friendly hobby as long as you stay in 10th scale, because 8th scale is a lot more expensive. A kit on its own can cost well above $700, and that's not including electronics, that's not including the radio, that's not including batteries, which each can go well above $100. So yeah, if you want to stick with a budget-friendly racing series, go with 10th scale. Especially considering the deals that you can get for electronics in general. For example, this 6.5 motor that I got from my local hobby shop right before it closed down, I got for $75 simply because the seal was broken. It's a brand new motor. Any hobby these days is going to have some level of financial commitment, unfortunately. I just hope I gave you some ideas to take that sting away. And that's all for now. If you liked the video, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe if you want to see more. Also, if you don't see my uploads, be sure to hit the bell icon on the right next to it so you can actually see when I upload. Lastly, if you want to support me another way, specifically financially, check out my Patreon, which I linked in the description below and probably going to put it in the comments as well. Speaking of which, I'd like to thank my patrons Lucas Tarka, Michael Williams, RC World Discord server, Casey Nix, and Ben Reeves. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.